The Ukrainian army is experiencing one of its worst periods in the history of the special military operation. An absolutely critical situation on the battlefield. Losing territory, losing men, and above all, with stampede-like retreats, which end with the direct elimination of Ukrainian army officers by their own soldiers. Today, we're going to see how things are really unfolding on the battlefield, because Western media are already doing everything possible to hide these facts. Precisely, this is the plan of the Kiev regime, to act as if absolutely nothing is happening, as if they have everything under control. But that's far from true. In fact, the exact opposite is happening, and I'm going to prove it to you in this video. And not only that, stay until the end, because along with Russian advances and the Ukrainian army now suffering repeated defeats, I'm going to show you how the price to pay is actually much higher. That is, those who are eliminated here are not only Ukrainian soldiers, but also civilians from this very country. Yes, at the hands of their own army. I'm Zaporizhzhia, a Donbass war correspondent and geopolitical analyst. Subscribe to this channel to stay up to date with the latest international news and, of course, the latest updates on the Ukrainian conflict. Let's begin. We'll start, as usual, from the beginning. Ukraine is experiencing its worst moments on the battlefield. We have been very used to talking about the Donetsk front, which we will definitely discuss in the following reports. However, now we have to turn our attention to another front that has become absolutely crucial in recent weeks, which is the Zaporizhzhia front, where the Russian Federation has just reached the main point, both logistically and directly. One of the most important points of that particular front, which is the town of Plight. The fighting is already on the outskirts of that town, although the Kiev regime, of course, is trying to deny it. There is already graphic evidence. Russian Federation assault unit soldiers are in Plight, directly where, I repeat, the fighting is already taking place. And everything points to this town falling much faster than it eventually will. Pokrovsk, a crucial fact, the disorganization that the Russian Federation has, that the President of the Federation, the Russian Federation has, that the President of the Federation has said, that the President of the Russian Federation has said, that the President of the Federation of Russia has said, that the President of the Federation, he has said that that Russia could already be in Plight at this moment. On one hand, Ukrainian soldiers no longer want to fight for the Kiev regime, and this is becoming more and more evident. On one hand, it has to do, of course, with the general demoralization, with the corruption that is currently plaguing the entire Ukrainian government. For now, Volodymyr Zelensky is being spared, but probably not even for much longer. His number two is no longer in office. On the front lines, obviously, things couldn't remain unaffected by these events. And in some areas, particularly on the Zaporozhye front, absolutely inconceivable events have taken place until just a few moments ago. Thus, an entire battalion of Ukrainian soldiers has been directly abandoned by their superiors. The chaos on the front was total. The forces of the Russian Federation were advancing too quickly, so the battalion in question was cut off in every way. There was no communication at all. And, of course, these men basically had to do whatever they could to somehow escape certain death. But what happened in the same direction of Zaporozhye, with two companies in particular, was even more serious. After Russian units advanced through Potovka and Uspinovka, and it became clear the Ukrainian defense couldn't hold out, two companies of Ukrainian soldiers decided to abandon their positions, either by surrendering or by directly fleeing the battlefield. They were confronted by a direct junior officer, Andrei Kavalov. May he rest in peace, because he was killed by his own soldiers so they could escape certain death. The facts are already being confirmed by several sources from Ukraine itself. And really, I repeat, they are absolutely unbelievable, inconceivable. Until just a few moments ago, it was true that the Ukrainian defense was falling apart, but not to the point where Ukrainian soldiers would start directly eliminating their own commanders. It sets a precedent, and we'll see what the reaction of the Ukrainian state will be. Most likely, the soldiers they managed to catch will be punished for what we know as the hole, which is indeed a hole in the ground about 3 meters deep. There's no light, water, or anything there. They simply throw them in there like some kind of wounded animals, so they have to stay inside for a few days, a few hours, depending on what the crime is. Afterwards, some end up getting out, others aren't so lucky. Whatever the case, this is a very hard blow for the Kiev regime, which of course won't be led by any Western supporter. But because if they did, it would put pressure once again on Zelensky's government to do what is absolutely obvious, what needs to be done right now if they want to preserve the lives of their own soldiers and civilians. We'll talk about this particular point in a moment. Now is the perfect time for Ukraine to accept the conditions of the Russian Federation and to stop fighting because the battlefield won't last much longer. The Ukrainian defense is collapsing, not just occasionally, but systematically, which I imagine is understood to be much more dangerous, infinitely more dangerous. In this case, we draw this conclusion by analyzing what is happening across the entire Ukrainian front. Here we have been talking, and will continue to talk, especially about the Zaporozhzhia front, where the most significant fighting is now taking place. Because indeed, it seems that we were right when we pointed out the direction of Donetsk. Especially the Pakhtunkhwa-Krovsky-Myrnograd area is now entirely surrounded by the Russian Federation's armed forces. It was something like the best or one of the best psychological operations carried out by the Russian army within the special military operation. Very little. And it seems that they have been using this crowd as a kind of decoy, making it the most publicized, attracting the vast majority there, allowing themselves, therefore, to move forward directly. And we already see it as quite simple, relatively speaking, of course. Elsewhere, Kupiansk is fully controlled by the Russian Federation, 90% of Bauchansk as well, and advances continue in Seversk and Lyman. That is, I repeat, the collapse of the Ukrainian defense is absolutely systemic. And after the capture of Gulaipol, which will very likely require less time for Russia than what it is currently spending to definitively take, for example, the town of Pokrovsk itself. Once it actually happens, it will open the door for the Russian armed forces to the town of Erek. And from there, they will go directly to the regional capital, that is the city of Zaporozhye. This seems, as of today, extremely far off. But given how things are going for the armed forces of Ukraine, it could actually happen in just a few months. For now, what is very clear is that in a very short time, Russia will begin to approach the town of Gulaipol, trying to avoid directly confronting the Ukrainian formations, where, yes, indeed, they still have some defensive positions built. They're going to try to surround them as much as possible and then close this pincer, pressing from both sides and forcing the Ukrainian soldiers to have to make a great so that a great effort is made, so that a great effort is made, so that a great effort is made. What a great effort, so that a great effort is made, so that a great effort is made. He interprets, he is one of the Arten, but one of them on the ground. Precisely because of that, the officer seemed to lose all control over his own men. And in fact, the situation ended up becoming so absolutely critical that the Ukrainian command, which this time was no longer on the battlefield, ended up sending the 225th Battalion to try to control the situation in any way possible. It seems that they managed to do it, but only temporarily, since the armed forces of the Russian Federation kept advancing. And finally, they did reach the outskirts of Gulaipol, where, I repeat, the first assault units of the Russian Federation have already been spotted. Those soldiers who are already facing the Ukrainian forces on the outskirts of Gulaipol. That is to say, regardless of all the attempts by the Kiev regime to pretend some kind of normality, things are getting out of hand. It's absolutely out of control, and it could get worse. I imagine everyone understands infinitely worse. So it's precisely now when they should be thinking about protecting the lives of their soldiers and, of course, the lives of their civilians. One of the most serious aspects of this situation, as well as one that is absolutely key to understanding how far the desperation of the Kiev regime goes and how far they are willing to go in the Kiev regime just to keep living off the war narrative and keep receiving Western aid in abundance. The civilians in the area have not been evacuated. Yes, that's right. Russian Federation soldiers are already in Gulaipol with fierce battles on its outskirts. But the armed forces of Ukraine have not evacuated civilians. They have been given the choice to either leave the town or stay inside it. And there are two main reasons for this. The first one, of course, is the media. If the Kiev regime starts to evacuate both Gulaipole and the surrounding towns, it will have to finally admit that the Russian advance has reached that area, which officially they are trying to deny in every possible way, trying to at least maintain this winning image of the Ukrainian army in the media. In other words, they are basically sacrificing the lives of their own civilians just to look good on the front pages of some media outlets. But there is still a second reason, which could actually be infinitely more serious. They are sacrificing the lives of their civilians, giving them a choice when, in reality, if there is no forced evacuation, so to speak, no mandatory evacuation, the civilians don't really have much of a choice. I mean, at a certain point, they might think they have full control over the situation and that they will be able to hold out, that maybe they can survive in basements. Some simply have nowhere to go, but there are many who have children who are in a position to leave. A town that now, well, is going to become part of what is total war in an absolutely imminent way. They don't do it because the government doesn't make it clear enough for them. The situation seems like it could be controlled. They let us choose, but in reality, that choice today seems to be between leaving or staying inside what is their home. It can become much more direct, much more serious, much more dangerous, even much more fatal, you could say. In other words, it could turn in just a few moments into a choice between life and death. The Ukrainian regime is well aware of this. The thing is, they can't afford to evacuate or they don't want to spend the resources, which are already scarce, to do so. So they leave most of the population in place. That way, Ukrainian soldiers can take advantage of their presence. Well, 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 well. Is it reliable for that? So most likely these civilians will simply remain as they are and exactly where some of them are. It's true that Ukraine has set out to evacuate them, but only those who have chosen the path of evacuation, which I repeat has been offered to them half heartedly, because ultimately it would mean spending resources to evacuate the civilian population and therefore not spending resources on the army, which are already scarce for them, and therefore probably facing the possibility of no longer receiving that amount of resources that Ukraine so desperately needs to hold on. Month after month, as the war drags on, payments continue, and civilians, those who truly care, are affected. The Kiev regime, I assure you, though I'm not entirely certain,